A wounded mama bear leads a woman to her dying cub, but what she finds there leave everyone in tears. Emma adjusted her backpack and sighed, the crisp morning air biting at her cheeks. She was deep in the forest, seeking the peace only nature could provide. But just as she rounded a bend in the trail, she froze. A massive bear stumbled into view, its fur streaked with blood and its steps uneven. Emma's heart pounded, her breath catching in her throat. The animal locked eyes with her, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. This wasn't the wild charge of a predator. It was something else. The bear let out a low, guttural sound, not a roar, but almost a cry. Emma's stomach tightened. Then, it did something she couldn't have expected. The bear turned and began limping away, only to glance back at her as if waiting. Her pulse quickened. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal, and she had a decision to make. Emma's body was frozen with fear, her mind racing with every possibility of what could happen next. The bear, clearly injured, paused and looked back at her once more. Its eyes, dark and intense, seemed to plead with her. Emma had heard stories of animal behavior, of how creatures in the wild could act unpredictably. But this was something entirely different. The bear let out another low sound, a mix of pain and desperation, and limped further into the trees. Emma felt her legs start to move almost on their own, cautiously following the massive creature. Her instincts screamed to turn back, to run and never look over her shoulder. But something about the bear's gaze had rooted her in place. As she trailed behind, her heartbeat thundered in her chest. The forest grew denser, the light filtering through the canopy dimmer. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made her jump. She kept a safe distance, never too close, but close enough to see the bear's bloodied paw leaving faint red marks on the ground. Why was she doing this? She wondered. This was no ordinary bear. Its behavior was deliberate, almost purposeful. With every step, Emma's anxiety deepened, but so did her curiosity. Something compelled her forward, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this bear was leading her to something far more important than she could imagine. Emma's breathing was shallow as she followed the bear deeper into the forest. The air felt heavier here, the thick canopy above blocking out much of the sunlight. The faint sound of trickling water reached her ears, but her focus remained locked on the lumbering creature ahead. It moved with a strange rhythm, slow and deliberate, yet with an urgency that tugged at her instincts. As the bear limped onward, Emma noticed fresh claw marks on the nearby trees. A shiver ran down her spine. Was it marking its territory? Or were other predators nearby? The blood trail left by the bear was growing thicker, the stains on its fur a grim reminder of its pain. But despite its obvious struggle, it pressed on. Every so often, it would stop and turn to look at her, as if checking to make sure she was still following. Emma couldn't tell if it was trust or desperation, but there was something unmistakably intelligent in the way it moved. Her nerves were frayed, every sound around her amplified. The snap of a twig behind her made her spin, her heart leaping into her throat, but nothing was there. When she turned back, the bear had stopped. It stood at the edge of a clearing, its massive frame silhouetted against the dappled light. Emma stepped closer, her legs trembling. She peered past the bear into the clearing and gasped. There, on the forest floor, lay a small cub. Its fragile body was barely moving, its breath shallow and uneven. Emma's hands flew to her mouth. Whatever she had expected, this wasn't it. But the sight before her was just the beginning. Emma's heart broke at the sight of the cub. Its tiny chest rose and fell in weak, irregular movements, and its fur was matted with dirt and blood. The mama bear stepped cautiously toward her cub, letting out a soft, guttural sound, half growl, half whimper. Emma stood frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. The bear, despite its size and power, was utterly vulnerable. It had brought her here, not as a predator, but as a desperate mother seeking help. The clearing was eerily silent, broken only by the cub's faint wheezes. Emma's mind raced. She knew nothing about treating animals, let alone a wild bear cub. Yet, the urgency in the mama bear's eyes was impossible to ignore. She stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate, careful not to provoke the protective mother. That's when she saw it. A crude metal trap clamped around the cub's hind leg. The edges were rusted, and the blood-soaked fur around the wound told her it had been there for hours, if not longer. Emma's stomach turned as she realized the sheer pain the little creature must have endured. The mama bear stood a few feet away, watching Emma's every move. Emma knelt slowly, pulling out the small multi-tool from her backpack. Her hands shook as she examined the trap. Removing it would be risky, not just for the cub, but for her own safety. One wrong move could send the mother into a frenzy. She hesitated, looking up at the bear. Its deep, sorrowful eyes bore into hers, and for a moment, it felt as if the animal understood. Emma swallowed her fear and got to work. The trap was old and rusted, the mechanism stiff and unyielding. Sweat dripped down her temple as she struggled to loosen it. And then, with a loud click, the trap released. Emma exhaled a shaky breath as the cub let out a weak cry. The mama bear moved closer, her massive frame towering over Emma. For a terrifying moment, Emma thought she might attack. But instead, the bear gently nudged the cub with her nose, letting out a sound that could only be described as relief. Emma sat back, heart pounding, as she witnessed a moment of pure, wild love. Yet even as relief washed over her, a new question formed in her mind. Who had set the trap, and why? Emma's relief was short-lived. Her gaze fell back to the trap, now lying discarded on the forest floor. It wasn't an accident or a relic. It was deliberate, placed by someone who had no regard for the lives of the animals in this wilderness. Her hands clenched into fists. Who could do something so cruel? The cub let out a feeble cry, snapping her attention back to the present. The mama bear hovered protectively over her cub, licking the wound with slow, deliberate movements. Emma knew the cub needed more help. The wound was deep, and infection was a real danger. But she also knew she couldn't stay here much longer. The forest was vast, and predators weren't the only threat. Whoever had set the trap could still be nearby. Emma rummaged through her backpack, pulling out a small first aid kit. She had packed it for herself, but never imagined she'd be using it on a bear cub. Slowly, she inched closer, her movements careful and deliberate. The mama bear growled softly, her protective instincts flaring. Emma whispered softly, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "I'm just trying to help. Please, let me help." The bear hesitated but didn't attack, her gaze fixed on Emma. Trust, fragile and tentative, hung in the air. Emma worked as quickly as she could, cleaning the wound and wrapping it with gauze from her kit. The cub whimpered but didn't resist. The mama bear stayed close, watching every move with a mix of caution and desperation. As Emma finished, she sat back, her hands trembling from adrenaline. The cub looked stronger already, its small body leaning into its mother for warmth. The mama bear let out a soft, rumbling sound, almost as if to thank her. Emma felt an unexpected wave of emotion. This wasn't just nature. It was something deeply profound. She had crossed a line between human and animal, a connection she hadn't known was possible. But the forest remained silent, the weight of the situation still heavy in the air. Emma glanced at the discarded trap again, unease gnawing at her. Someone had done this, and that someone was still out there. The mama bear, sensing her cub was stable, turned and began nudging it toward the woods. Emma stood, watching as the pair disappeared into the dense underbrush. For a moment, she felt the urge to follow, but she knew her role in their story was over. She had done her part. As she turned to leave, Emma made a silent vow. She wouldn't let this go. Whoever had placed that trap would be held accountable. The wilderness might be wild, but cruelty had no place here. What would you have done in Emma's place? Could you have faced the fear of a wounded bear to help her cub? Let us know in the comments below. Stories like these remind us of the fragile balance between humanity and the natural world. If this tale moved you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of courage and connection. Remember, compassion knows no boundaries, not even the wild. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and never underestimate the power of a single act of love.